spiritual excellence, family, ummah, craftsmanship, and fitness. These are the elements of the deep life. And Sultans and Sneakers is the podcast that inspires Muslim men to live the deep life. I'm your host, Maheen the Podcaster, and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Maheen the Podcaster, and on today's show, I am honored to be joined by Dr. Salah Sharief, calling in from Cairo, Egypt. Dr. Salah, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. My pleasure.
Dr. Salah, first of all, I understand, I was kind of confused about this. I understand you're from Manchester, England, but you're a Liverpool fan, and I wanted to offer my condolences that Liverpool missed out on the top four this year.
Yeah, I mean, I spent my whole life explaining that, to be honest. Anytime you go anywhere abroad, and I've spent such a long time abroad, people are like, where are you from? And you're like, Manchester. Oh, Manchester United. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
I want to ask you a question. There's a question that I'm interested as a Manchester native. So Manchester City has become very dominant in the last decade, right?
Yeah.
But I remember, because I've been following the Premier League since about 2007. And when I started, Manchester City, they weren't that great. And I remember when they picked up Robinho. That was like a big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now are Manchester City fans legit, or are they fair weather, or are there like really legit Manchester City fans in Manchester going back years? Like how's the demographic in the city itself? Like, is United and City separated by a boundary, or what?
So firstly, you'll easily be able to ascertain that once you ask the person, when did you start supporting? Of course, they're going to lie to you anyway, but if they did tell the truth, is it before or after the takeover, or even like a few years after the takeover? So say growing up, and I've got a massive family in Manchester. We're talking like, I have over 50 cousins in Manchester alone. Like, we're a massive family. Every single one of them are United fans except for one, my closest cousin. He's a City fan because he literally grew up across the road from Main Road Stadium. Yeah.
Okay.
So he's a City fan. Everyone else was a United fan. So we're talking in the early noughties, late 90s. So that shows the demographic in terms of like the increase and the influx of City fans. So many are going to be glorious sports, right? But one thing to understand is that in England, at least, football is a working class sport, or at least it used to be. That's the origins, right? So for the working class, the plumbers and the bricklayers and all these guys, they're going to support their local club, right? No matter what. And you got people, supporting a club for 50, 60 years without winning a single, league, or without much success at all. That's just part of their culture. So as far as the locals, they're going to be legit. But when you're seeing an influx of like international supporters, then, as it was with Chelsea before that, and, whenever a club gets money.
Right.
But yeah, so
okay.
Even one or two of those cousins have since, and you ask, when did this happen? But have since started wearing City shirts from United to City.
Oh, they switched. Okay, wow.
Like out of like 30 or 40 of them, you've got like one or two. So that's particularly shameful. But
I hear you. Yeah, no, it's not that's like crossing a rivalry. Because in America we have like football. Our rivalries are different. I don't know how passionate. I get the vibe that it's very passionate when you watch the Premier League from America. But we have a similar kind of rivalries in our sports here. And for someone to cross over to another team, like just one team is better.
It's a casual thing. No serious person's going to.
But people who take it seriously, we treat it like ridda, apostasy from the deen.
No, yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And if they can implement the had, they would as well.
For sure, right?
In fact, well, do you know what? Just before we get into it, this is a funny anecdote. Years ago, like maybe 10 years ago now, we were in town, and there was a match, and I'm trying to remember what match it was. It was, in fact, I think it was a derby, City versus United. Yeah, a derby with two teams of the same city played, and there were a bunch of City fans, rowdy City fans, in the middle of town, and it was like a heated match as well. And we were walking, and then they were like, one of my idiotic friends shouted something because they were on a bus and they were about to leave, and he shouted something like, whatever hooligan thing to shout, thinking he's a real hooligan when he's about to meet some real hooligans.
Yeah.
30 hooligans get off the bus, and I'm like, who was the Munich? And Munich, there's a disaster in Munich, a long time ago, right, with the United fans. So sure. they call United fans Munich, right? So like, who was the Munich? Who's the Munich? One of them grabs me, and I'm like 16 at the time, and these are like drunk hooligans, and it goes, are you the Munich? And I support Liverpool. And I'm like, no, I support Liverpool, I promise. And the thing is, like, I'm like, at that time as well, I was particularly a passionate, like, Muslim, like, I just started to get into the deen.
Sure.
And so my lens viewing the world was just in terms of Muslim and non-Muslim. And it was so bewildering to me that he didn't care about the color of my skin. He didn't care about I was a Muslim, not Muslim, I was brown, English. He was like, are you a Munich or not? Once he believed I was a Liverpool fan, then he goes, yeah, good lad. Yeah, you're a good lad. He starts giving me a high five. And then he found my friend. They beat him up and they left. So, that's how passionate they are about football.
For sure. All right, well, getting into the topic that I wanted to cover with you today, I found out about you, I want to say it's maybe like a little under 2 months ago. A good friend of mine, Nabil Aziz, he commissioned a book called 40 Hadith on Muslim masculinity. And when I spoke to him about it, I had the podcast, and he explained to me his point of view. And he said he's not the writer of the book. It was he had this idea, this framework, but he then went to, he's like, there's a student of knowledge, Dr. Salah Sharief. He owns Wordsmiths, and he commissioned the book. So I've heard Nabil's podcast. We did a podcast together. I heard his point of view. What's your, like, when he approached you, how does that process looks like? What's your point of view as the editor or the main writer or the whatever the proper term is for the work you did in this project?
To be honest, that's one of the most unique projects we've done, because usually we have standardized services. We have editing, we have translation. Those are the main two services we have. So in fact, Nabil approached me first to translate a book. It was a book allegedly by Imam Suyuti. And you might not be surprised to hear that it was a book basically on sexual relations with your wife. And, it was pretty graphic as well, right? But I'm not one to shy away, so I was like, let's do it. In fact, I've got the man for you. In fact, so it had a lot of poetry and it had a lot of sex. So I thought, hang on a minute. A lot of poetry and a lot of sex. I have the right man for this. So one of my translators, Mustafa Al-Qabbani, I'm not sure if you're aware of him.
I know him, yes.
Yeah. So I mentioned him, I was like, I've got the project for you, bro. Yeah. Mustafa was busy, so he went to another one of my translators. And this is the great thing about having scholars and students of knowledge on the team, because to be honest, every single one of our translators is either a scholar or a student of knowledge. Not as a requirement, but that's just how it happened to be, alhamdulillah. And he said yes, and then he did some digging, and he realized the book is not attributed to Imam Suyuti, or he renounced it. Basically, before his passing, Imam Suyuti made a long list of books, and he says, these are the books that I wrote. Anything not in this book, I denounce. And it's not included. So that means he never wrote it in the first place, or he denounced it. Either way, we weren't comfortable going ahead with it if the Imam renounced it, right? So I mentioned that to Nabil. He was pretty bummed out. So he said, okay, that's fine. But he quickly got back to me and he said, look, I've got the itch now. Let's do something. We should do something on this topic of masculinity. What about 40 hadith on masculinity? So now this is a completely different project. So now we're going to have to do takhrij, basically. We'll go to the hadith books and extract 40 hadiths. And then, so we said, you know what? Why the hell not? Like, let's do it. And mashallah, the team got pretty creative. We said, you know what? We gave him an option. We said, if we can either do 40 hadiths or we can do a 40 hadith plus commentary. And he said, yallah, let's do the commentary. And what we expected to be like a pamphlet turned out to be 95,000 words. Which, like, if I choose as an example, like that's like probably something like this. Like this is probably 95,000 words. So it turned into a massive book. And we've not done something like that before, and we may not. So that was, maybe that was a one-off But that's a very unique experience.
I know the project has gotten really good reviews. I know Sheikh Ismail Kamdar from Yakin Institute recently put out a review about it. Now, did you have a relationship with Nabil prior to this project?
No, not at all. Funnily enough, like a month before that, I emailed him regarding his services as a
copywriter.
As a copywriter for one of my other businesses. That he's pushing me off. I think he's too in the big leagues for small little business like mine. He was like, "Yeah, don't worry about it," and that was it. So maybe I was at the forefront of his mind when this came up,
right?
And we got recommended to him.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, no, I had no recollection.
Did you have now? We kind of slightly alluded to it. Nabil is a controversial, provocative figure. Did you have any reservations working with him? In a sense that like concerns about your own brand if you did a project with him?
I did get a couple of messages from some friends. They were like, "Are you sure?" So the answer is no. And I don't know, how much of my stuff on Facebook, especially you follow or maybe your audience, but I am a strong advocate of financial independence, and especially for scholars and students of knowledge. And I drum this point home. And I don't like to, guilt trip people who are in a 9-to-5, and we can discuss that. But generally speaking, I'm not talking about entrepreneurship. I'm just talking about financial independence, right? And the reason why I'm such a big advocate for people of knowledge, especially, is that it's a precursor for actual independence, right? So what's the point of me being an entrepreneur with financial independence, who is then going to be shackled by what people might think of me? So the answer is no. To be honest, you can't cancel me. Alhamdulillah. I mean, that's a huge ni'mah. Because who's gonna cancel me? Who are you gonna speak to? There's no one who can, stop my paycheck. Alhamdulillah, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So quite frankly, no, I wasn't worried. I'm not gonna align 100% with him, and I don't have to either. But I don't disagree with him to the extent that I would be so worried about my own reputation.
I got you. Really. Now, segue into like productivity and time management. So I had a chance to like consume some of your content. I'm actually interested. So we all have, we talk about you've talked about systems a lot, systems that work for you, that are customizable. Because sometimes people ask you for a system, like what works for you won't for me. At what age did you like start understanding this idea of time management, or as a concept, and start honing this? Like how did that process look for you when you got started, and when you realized this was something that was important?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I introspect and reflect, I realize that anything I've done that's been like a positive contribution or has been noteworthy or worthwhile has always, without exception, come about organically. I've never sat down and said, let me develop a system. So whether it's any of my businesses, I've never sat down and said, let me start a business. What business shall I start? It was a service or a product that turned into a business, right? It was organic. And it's the same thing for this. So I'm like an efficiency fiend, just naturally as part of my fitrah. Like I hate wasting time. That's why I'm so impatient. And like, standing in queues just like drives me crazy. Like just wasting time, wasting money, just wasting anything. It really irks me. So if something's being done inefficiently, then by definition, that's wasting. That's wasting time. That's wasting resources. So whenever, so I'm always have that at the forefront of my mind. And then when I do something that works well, I recognize it and I'll implement it. And so it was when I started university. So that's at the age of 18, 19. And I did a law degree at I think it was like a top 5 university in England, in the School of Law. And the standard was so high compared to like school, basically, compared to college and school. And I was drowning in work. So it was do or die. Like people were dropping like flies in the course. Like people were dropping out, not being able to hack it. So it got to the point where I was so behind that I had to be smarter in my technique than everyone else just to catch up, never mind to excel. So by week 8, I had done like 1 or 2 modules out of 8 and I'm like completely drowning. And so, I was forced to develop those systems. So it's around that age, around 18, 19, 20, I started to realize that not all time is equal, that mantra that I have, and compartmentalizing and realizing that 1 hour in the morning is not the same, and all these study techniques, I had to implement it. And then Once I realized that I had something good going on, that's when I started just to, I wouldn't say teach, but like inform other people that look, this is a good system to follow.
Yeah, you talk about like one example you give, and I want to talk because sometimes people will hear you speak about you don't go to the gym in the morning, right? Because that doesn't work for you. It works for you later. But you talk about some of your friends. Like for me, my best day starts with like gym after Fajr.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the day, because after the end of the day, work day, I'm tired for that. I could do something else like train like jiu-jitsu or something, but like strength training or weight training, sometimes it's harder to get that momentum to get going again, right? Because your day starts moving a different direction. So I think I respect the fact that you also have emphasized in your talks that you have to find what works for you and try different things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a question of, can I work out in the afternoon? Can I work out in the morning? The answer to both is yes. Can I memorize Quran in the afternoon? No. Like, if it'll take me 5 hours to do something that will take an hour in the morning.
Right.
Therefore, mathematically, like pragmatically, it just makes sense that if I was to work out in the morning, I feel like I'm wasting time.
I got you. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so you're almost like weighing what are you going to replace the time with and efficiency there. And maybe, and it's a good point, because maybe if someone wants to learn Arabic or memorize Quran and they like working out in the morning, but they can still work out in the afternoon, but maybe they have to push themselves a little bit more. Maybe that trade-off is worth it then too. If they're getting nothing from Arabic in the afternoon because you're tired after work, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things to decide. There's two things to figure out before you making the timetable. One is where does your energy lie in the day? So for me, it's very simple. It starts at 100 and by the end of the day, it goes down to 0. It's a linear thing. Maybe for some people, they're going to spike at certain points. Figure that out for yourself. And the second thing is, what is your priority? Make a hierarchy of your priorities in terms of the acts you're doing or the tasks you're completing. What's the most important? And then you're going to cross-reference the both. So for me, the morning is I'm 100 and then it goes down. And then for me, look, well, working out is not the top 3 things in my priority. If I was training for a competition, then okay, cool. Then maybe like I wake up in the morning, the first thing I need to do is work out and get that full energy. It's not. It's absolutely not. So what is the most important thing? Well, my classes are, or memorizing is, whatever that might be, is going to go first.
Okay, now, so with that being said, as someone in multiple disciplines, you're an entrepreneur, that pays your bills, you're studying right now. How do you determine what is like? There's a book out there. It's called The One Thing. I don't know if it's a productivity book that's been out for a few years now, but they always talk about you focus on that one thing. And when you're doing multiple businesses or multiple endeavors, how do you prioritize what is the one thing, or does that change day to day depending on the needs of the business or the needs of school?
So you used a good word there. You said prioritize. Usually people say balance, right? How do you balance those things, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's one thing that one of my teachers, Sheikh Akram, that he taught me early on, was that there's no such thing as balancing two unequal things. You inherently cannot balance two things that are unequal, right? So what do you do then is prioritize instead. And he's talking about from the context of dunya and akhirah, like, how do you balance dunya and akhirah? Well, Yawm al-Qiyamah is 50,000 years and you live for about 80 max, so you can't balance them. You prioritize, right? But then I've extrapolated down to every other facet of our existence. And in this context is, which tasks to do. So I ask myself, what's the most important thing to me? And so for me, it's very important that entrepreneurship is a means to an end. It's not an end. And I tell myself very frequently that if I was to spend 40 hours a week working on my businesses, I'd probably quit. I'd probably just because what differentiation is there between me and a normal working person? We're both working 40 hours a week in the first place, right? The only difference is I have some more control and power over my time, but I also have infinitely more responsibility and anxiety and stress and all the rest of it that an employed person wouldn't have, because the buck stops with me. So the benefit of entrepreneurship for me is the extra time so that I can spend it doing something else. And what is that something else? Well, seeking knowledge. So that's why for me, then the talab al-ilm comes first, and then the entrepreneurship and even the physical activity and everything else really revolves around that and facilitates that.
Okay. No, so right now you're doing a program at Lazard.
Well, no, not quite. The problem is, yeah, and I guess we will talk about that as well. Life in the Middle East is, you know, how should I put this? Life in the Middle East is testing, right?
Yeah.
So administration doesn't really exist in the developing world to the extent that, you know, someone born and raised in the West might expect. So
Sure.
they delayed my application for so long, for like more than 2 years, that I've just continued private studies my whole time here in Egypt, which has been about 3 years so far. So I've just been studying privately. I am considering just applying online anyway and just doing that over the next few years.
Right.
But my priority is just my private studies with the teachers I have.
Now, isn't that, like, I've heard that's actually more effective in the long run than actually maybe going through the education, the university system.
Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the reasons why it's happened this way. Because if I wasn't such a, like, an efficiency thing, I would be in that system with like 6 years ahead of me. Half of the things I've already covered in my previous studies anyway, and for me, I just couldn't tolerate that lack of efficiency. So, I actually got permission. It's a crazy story, perhaps for another time, but literally, I traveled 12 hours to meet Sheikh Al-Azhar in his village, like the head, like the most senior Islamic figure in the whole of Egypt. And personally, in his local mosque, because he was the chieftain of his village, before he was Sheikh Al-Azhar in the first place.
Okay, sure.
Right, so people in the queue in front of me were like farmers and housewives and random people who had nothing to do with Azhar. But he's the chieftain, and I waited in the queue and I asked him, "Can I skip the whole high school process because I'm doctor and, you know, I'm this and that. I'm an academic from England. I want to come and study Islam so I can teach it back in the West." That was my whole spiel. And he signed it. He signed the document, sent me back, and yet they still delayed me 2 years. Like, one person sent me to another. So the idea was to skip that whole 8 to 12 year, you know, process. You know, but it's purely from an academic perspective, definitely it's 1,000 times more effective just doing what I'm doing. But there are other benefits that come with that as a degree, and from a social perspective, you know, people recognize as hard. It really depends what your plan is afterwards. Many people I know, you know, the Azhar certificate would be a means to their income and a means to their legitimacy, and it's quite critical. Whereas for myself, not really. If I am going to teach anything, I don't really need that certificate to do it. I'll just do it anyway. I don't intend on taking any money for teaching in the future. So I am in two minds. I might go ahead and just do it anyway, just to put that, you know, seal on it. But we'll see, inshallah.
There you go. For a few seconds. We finally had that incident where you cut out for a second. It's all good.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, but it's fine. Yeah. So, like, if you do the Azhar thing, then so you'll be in Egypt for a while, right? It'll be several years.
Look, so the first time I came to Egypt was 2012, actually, and I came for 2 months in between semesters in university. And every year or two I would come and brush up on my studies for the last things, and I'll study online. I moved to Egypt on a permanent basis in 2020, so that was 3 years ago. So it's already been 3 years. Most people who study at Azhar, and again, each of these questions, by the way, could be a podcast in itself. So, you know, we could talk about that for hours. But most people who go to Azhar don't attend the classes. The vast majority of people who do Islamic studies at Azhar do not attend the classes for a number of reasons, and just basically teach with the local scholars, study with the local scholars, and revise in groups and whatnot, and take the exams. So I know countless people who don't even live in Egypt who have certificates from the Azhar. They come twice a year to take the exams and go back, right, and do the rest of their studies, right? There is also an Azhar online program, which is the same program, except you have your classes on Zoom and you have your documents on Google Drive, and you take your exam online live. That's also a consideration too. So no, Egypt, like, this is the last year I have in Egypt now, inshallah. My mom she's had enough. Every month she'll ask me if I'm coming back, and this year, like, she's not enough. So yeah, this is my last year in Egypt, inshallah.
Okay. Now the thing of it is, what's the topics in Islamic studies that like really appeal to you? Like, I guess what's your passion at? What's the stuff that wakes you up, that gets you going in the morning, that excited to study?
So the thing is, it's a bit of an underwhelming response, man, because I feel like it's a bit disingenuous to answer that before you've got the knowledge itself, and it's a bit of a cliche. It's a big cliche, but the more I'm studying, the more I realize like how long I've got to go, how little I know. It's actually quite demoralizing. That's how much of a painful truth it is. And so, to be a scholar, they say you need to be a jack of all trades, and then you become an expert at one. So you cover all your bases, then you do takhasus, you do some specialism, right? Mm-hmm. So in a way, you're asking me like, what would I like my specialism to be? That's sort of the question. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, I don't feel like I'm a jack at anything. Yeah. So, and I feel so far from that realization. Although I've always been intrigued by history. And I think there could be some research there to be done, and because I feel like so much of people's misunderstanding of Islam and misconception with regard to their own aqidah is because of a inaccurate understanding of Islamic history. Whether it's a utopian understanding and they've whitewashed it, or whether they've heard or the opposite, or vice versa. But I think the more you study history, even past the Salaf, just Islamic history and how it intertwines with the primary sources, that can give us a much more accurate understanding of how to move forward. How to deal with the plethora of issues that the Ummah has. So I am quite interested in history.
So now, how does seeking knowledge? I remember in the early 2000s, that was when Al-Maghrib Institute was first launching, and we started these other institutes, and people started talking about, I want to go study, I want to go to Medina, or I want to go to Azhar, or I want to go to Yemen. How does a person know if they're really cut out to be a student of knowledge, or if they're just following a fad, or worse, if they're just trying to get famous? How does someone know if that's what they're cut out for?
A big indicator would be, are you utilizing every resource that you have in your current space, right? So what so many people don't realize is that traveling to a certain place is not going to make you something you're not. It's not going to make you a student of knowledge. Some people get depression when they go to these places because the utopia that they expected exists, but not with them. So they have the Prophet's mosque, ﷺ, right next to them. They have their own dome. They have a pile of books, and they can't motivate themselves to study, right? And so a massive indicator is, are you utilizing what you have right now? So you're in a city. You've got either a job or secular studies, or you're doing something, and you think as soon as this finishes, I'm going to be a student of knowledge. Well, in that period, in that position that you're in now, are you reaching out to local scholars? Are you attending local classes? Are you studying online with those teachers in Medina or Egypt or elsewhere? Are you utilizing that? And if you're not, then you need to question yourself and ask yourself: Are you a student of Medina? Are you a student of Azhar? Or are you a student of Islamic studies? Are you doing this for Allah and His Messenger, or are you doing this for the feeling, or So does your lot? Because I even had someone emailed me a month ago, similar topic about this. They were very passionate about studying at a certain institution, and their parents wouldn't allow it. So I encouraged them to go anyway, and I advised them on how to discuss with their parents. But then I said to them, look, is your loyalty towards that institution, or is your loyalty towards Allah's deen? And if it's the latter, then why are you not studying now? Why are you not taking steps to do that? And that'll be a good litmus test. Because if you're not, and then you try doing that, and it's not as interesting or entertaining or fulfilling as you thought, then then perhaps going to another city by yourself and living a new life, that's not going to be the solution. Allah.
I was really blown away in one of your previous interviews where you guys talked about traveling from um, traveling all the way to, was it Cambridge, to go study with Sheikh Akram?
Oxford.
Oxford. Okay, and so there's this idea here. In a lot of our American cities, people talk about studying, and they might have a certain scholar or a giant, someone who's recognized in the field, but they're not, like, let's say 100% ideologically aligned. Let's say somebody is, I know in the UK you guys have a lot of Barelvis. I've never come across, I don't know, I don't recognize them, but in Chicago we don't, like, Chicago's a Deobandi city, right? Let's say you're in Chicago and you're Barelwi and all the Mashaykh are Deobandis, and you're just like, you want to study, but you're like blowing it off because of et cetera, et cetera. You don't agree with them, or you're a Salafi, but they're all or they're maybe they're more Sufi inclined, they're traditionalists, but they follow a madhab, etc. But they have fiqh or something, and or they have really good, or they're really good in tafsir. This is my perception: is that a lot of people have then ignored their local mashayikh because they don't see 100% eye to eye with them. Is this something you see as well? Is this a trap? Is this a pitfall? Or is that person actually justified in not going to that scholar? Because if they don't commit to them, because of, there's always going to be a separation, because they're like, I don't trust that person, like, because of a lack of trust. Do you understand the question? Yeah. Because sometimes people, I think, like, my observation in Chicago, we have a lot of like giants as far as mashayikh go, but people are not utilizing them because they just don't, like, for example, maybe they're a part of like Hizb ut-Tahrir, or they don't like that scholar's position on politics, but everything else is clean. But then they don't take anything from him. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's a massive pitfall. It's a massive trap, to be honest with you. And it's one of the biggest problems I have with University of Medina, or most of the Saudi unis, and some elsewhere too, which is, you are just confining yourself with this echo chamber, and all you're going to do is confirm what you already thought in the first place. And isn't that so disingenuous that you're yet to seek the knowledge, and yet you're defining the parameters of what's acceptable? You are a self-proclaimed jahil. You're ignorant, and that's why you're going to study. And yet you are defining what is acceptable in studies, right? So all you've done for yourself is seal your fate, and you're gambling as to whether your 16-year-old mind, or however old you might be, was correct in their first assumption, right? So it's a massive problem, to be honest. And this notion of take the good and leave the bad has somehow become a negative thing, has somehow become like we snub our noses, oh yeah, take good. No, literally, take the good and leave the bad, yeah? Like, there are thousands upon thousands of stories from the past of people narrating hadith from those that they would view as their own enemy, and they would conceal their own beliefs just to narrate the hadith that they can take from them, and then they would run away, and then they would tell them their real beliefs. Sheikh Akram used to tell us funny stories as well about about Shia, a Shi'i master of hadith, and then one of the hadith scholars wanted to narrate a particular hadith from him, and he would test people on their knowledge of the Shi'i doctrine, and just so that they wouldn't narrate to any Sunnis, so they would conceal their true beliefs. And then once they got the hadith from them, once they got the hadith, because the Shaykh, Shaykh would ask before you narrate hadith, who made the sea? And they would say Allah. Yes, Allah made the sea, but who made the sea? And they were like, Ali. Correct. Okay, and who filled the sea? Allah. Yes, Allah filled the sea, but who filled it? Hussein. Okay, right. So he would acquire the hadith from him, and then before he left, he would say, Muawiyah made the sea, and Amr bin As filled it. No, I'm not condoning this. That's just a funny story. But getting serious, back to the point, taking the good and leaving the bad. This is an essential doctrine of a student of knowledge, because most of what you're going to learn is going to come from teachers who are you're not going to align with 100%. And it's so arrogant for you to write off people and before you've even acquired the knowledge yourself. And I think people underestimate their own intellect. It's like almost like an intellectual castration where they say, oh, I'm worried I'm going to get misguided if I go to these people. Like, do you apply this castration for any other, form of knowledge? When you go to university, when you learn about the natural sciences, do you apply this to yourself? English literature, do you apply this? Only when it comes to Islam, you treat yourself like a toddler, like a child, but you can't like decline 10% of what he's saying and accept the other 90%. But a good safeguarding mechanism is peer review, and that happens in the West and the East, and it's an age-old thing. So if so many other scholars, not just from the same sect that you're aligning with, but generally you're seeing other scholars are praising a particular sheikh about something that they're teaching, then you might, they're well known for their hadith, and they're doing a hadith class, but they're Ash'ari and you're a Salafi and you're going to attend. Well, you're lost, to be honest with you. You're not going to, all you're going to do is confine yourself within the parameters that you made for yourself before you acquired the knowledge in the first place.
Right. I mean, but but it seems like all of us, whether we like it or not, we're always going to be inclined towards a certain demographic, right?
So, sorry, I just cut out you there. You said it seems like all of us.
Yeah. So like in general, once we start practicing, right, we're going to start inclining towards the folks that like that we're exposed to. That's how we'll agree with. So naturally, people are going to have a certain inclination to some group or whatever, right? I think it's that like it's very hard to find someone who's going to be completely like neutral. Oh, I'm just a Muslim, right?
Yeah, everyone thinks they're just a Muslim, right? I think I'm just a Muslim.
Right.
Those people who are describing as being as part of the sect, they think they're just a Muslim. So
right.
For sure, who is free from bias?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying. So now when you look at like for example, when I look at, because even when I always think about these like Venn diagrams. Are you familiar with like a Venn diagram? Like these like okay, so you have within Sunniism you have all these like inclinations, these groups, depending on their like personal dispositions. So for example, when I look at Sheikh Akram, right? I had a chance to meet Sheikh Akram about a year ago. He came to Chicago. And so he, but I've known of him because I have his book about Madrasa life that he wrote several years back. But when I associate him with, I associate him with like Darul Ulum, Nadwa Ulama, right? And what I know about Nadwa is that like, oh, it's a very like, it's traditional, but they also are thinking about the modern world and trying to, navigate that. Versus Darul Ulum Deoband is more traditional, but more like strict and rigid. That's kind of my thing. And I take from both, but like I know that's what I'm getting with him. And then I know when I interviewed Sheikh Omar Khan, Sheikh Omar says that Sheikh Akram is all about thinking from a first principles point of view, right? And that appealed to him, right? Yeah. So like it's important. So to me, it's like I would assume that students who are people who have committed to study under Sheikh Akram, they have a certain kind of disposition that kind of fits, generally speaking, with him like that. Like that's the kind of outlook or worldview they share, even though they may not agree 100%, but they see eye to eye on like some big things, right?
So the funny thing is, it's actually the opposite when it comes to Sheikh Akram.
Okay.
But just before I get into that,
yeah,
you made a note about Nadwat al-Ulama. The success of Nadwat al-Ulama is derived from the openness within the Sunni spectrum. And Sheikh Akram would tell countless stories walking in the courtyard with a Salafi, an Ikhwani, a Deobandi, and himself, and they would just battle of the wits in a very cordial manner. And that atmosphere, like it's very reminiscent of like Abu Hanifa's circles, of like that atmosphere of like open, academia, which is extremely healthy, to be honest. As for Sheikh Akram himself, then he's a good example of the peer review process, the scholarly peer review process that I mentioned previously, because he's most famous for his Hadith studies, and he's quite well renowned amongst the scholarly circles for his Hadith. Although he mentions himself that his biggest expertise is the Arabic language, and his PhD was on Arabic. on the Arabic language itself. But he's most known for his Hadith Studies. So people from other groups and sects or orientations, they often attend his classes. So within the class, people are trying to take the good and leave the bad from his classes. But the interesting thing about Shaykh is that, and perhaps it's almost like a reverse psychology, that he is so open to being criticized in the class, and to he's very non-committal to any sectarian or aqidah thing in the class, and he is so disinterested in converting you towards his mentality that he leaves a very open atmosphere in the room. And one thing I've noticed is that almost always, after 1 or 2 years of studying with the Sheikh, that person is transformed. I know someone who was hardcore within the hierarchy of Hizb ut-Tahrir, like you mentioned, and within a couple of years of studying with Sheikh Akram, his mentality was completely different. Although he's still very political, and he hasn't abandoned his roots in that regard. And the exact same example with a Salafi inclined person and another person, many Deoband in the class. And so that's one of the beautiful things about studying with senior scholars from other orientations, is that you're not going to get converted. You're not going to you're not going to be a murtad from your previous sect, but you're going to have a newfound appreciation from many different perspectives. And that's the whole point of studying, man. It really irks me that the whole idea of studying is that you're learning more about the deen, that you're going to formulate your views and your opinions, and you're trying to ascertain that golden question of, what does the Prophet ﷺ teach, and what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from us? And you're trying to get the closest to that answer. And, if your answer 20 years later was the same as it was 20 years ago, sometimes you have to question, what exactly have you learned? It's like the Muhammad Ali quote, where if I had the same mentality that I had 20 years ago, then I've not learned anything. And it's true. So what are you so scared of from the other side, Wallah.
Yeah, that's sometimes you can walk into, I always joke that sometimes you could walk in some Salafi masajid, and this is a trope, but I think there's some accuracy to it, and they're 15 years later, they're still talking about why is Sayyid Qutb is a deviant. You know what I mean? Yeah. But they haven't progressed anything else, and the guy leads the prayer, and the tajweed isn't even on point for the Fatiha. So so Sheikh Akram, speaking on him, he I know you've met. It's been narrated that he writes from 5 in the morning to 11 in the morning every day. I think you mentioned this on a previous podcast interview, and it reminds me of the deep work that we talk about, as alluded to by Cal Newport. By the way, are you familiar with Cal Newport and his work?
Very vaguely. So I know the book you're referring to. I've not read it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess how does your if you but a lot of people are familiar with it, but they themselves, it seems like you yourself are doing deep work. The way you've structured your time, your time blocking, and all that. What does your deep work routine look like, and how long did it take to develop the muscle or the fortitude to do it? Because so many of us, that's another problem, is that so many of us, including myself, we have ADHD because of social media. We sit down to study, and 5 minutes later we're bored.
Bro, honestly, I've regressed majorly. I feel for sure, social media, my phone, all these things have hindered me so much. And so I'll answer your question, but on that note first, I realized something within myself also, is that my tolerance for things that don't interest me has decreased majorly. And I realized that one of the major factors that you have to be actually interested in the thing itself. That helps a lot, instead of continuously forcing yourself. So just recently, with Wordsmiths, my company is a proofreading and editing and translation company. However, it's been years since I've actually proofread anything myself, because I own the company. We have full-time staff, and I'm a manager. It wouldn't be a wise use of my time to be just proofreading, right? It's like the owner of a construction company. You're not going to find them on the ground level. Recently, though, I have edited one of the books for a particular reason, And it took me so long. Every 15 minutes I needed a break. My attention span was just not it. And I wasn't interested in doing the thing itself. I contrast that with writing, and for one of the books we had, I was asked to write like an introduction for it, and 3 hours passed and I didn't even realize, and I was just chugging away at it, and I was just enjoying it so much. And I think so that's a big aspect of it, is what you're actually interested in. However, I would caveat that with, you have to put yourself in a position of privilege to be able to pick and choose. So that's not a healthy mindset to have when you're in your early days and you're creating a name and a reputation for yourself. You really have to just, go against the grain and do whatever it takes. When you're in a position that you can, have, whether you have a reputation or a name or experience, or whether you're up in the ladder in your, in your industry, then you can start to pick and choose things that interest you. But as for the initial question about deep work and what that looks like, I think an important thing to understand is that we have to apply theory into the practical world that we live in. So I always talk about I always theorize what's the perfect routine. 1 hour in the morning is not the same as 1 hour in the evening. However, we don't live theoretical lives, we live practical lives. So it really depends on your routine itself. And some people ask me like, I have to work a 9 to 5, or I have to take care of my elderly mother every morning, and that eats into my tier 1 time, which is, like the most important time. And I say, listen, bro, don't take it that literally to that extent. You taking care of your mom, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to, forget that. So, don't stop doing that. That needs to be done. Implement, extrapolate is the main word I use. Extrapolate the essence of what I'm saying and try to implement it, right? So as far as deep work, it depends. As for me personally, it depends on what my routine looks like, what my life looks like. Right now, my priorities are my classes, and my most difficult and intensive things are my classes. So I don't have 5-6 hours in the morning to go into deep work on a particular project. My morning, it's like from Fajr to Dhuhr, are just full of classes, right? And those classes are so intensive, and they're not in my native language, they're in Arabic. And so by the time I'm sitting down to do any, independent work, I've got, the golden period of Fajr to Dhuhr has already been exhausted and utilized. And I'm utilizing that for my classes itself. I might contrast that with any writing projects. So for Sheikh Akram, he's not studying, he's not learning from anyone. His deep work is writing and researching. So, 2 years ago, a more appropriate example would be 2 years ago, I adapted Sheikh Yasir Qadhi's Seerah series into a book. Alhamdulillah, that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. That's been announced, right? So the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the famous, 104 episodes that YQ did, I adapted into a book. And that took 1,000 hours of writing, never mind however many hundreds of hours it took to proofread and edit and reference and everything else. But in the core writing took 1,000 hours. So I did a lot of deep work with that. And, at one point I was doing 12 to 14 hours a day of just that writing. But back to the interesting, because I was so in love with the project, I was interested. I just found energy. I just found energy from places that I wouldn't have otherwise. And for sure, it requires some practical mechanisms to putting your phone in a different room and all those sorts of tactics that I've discussed on other podcasts. So I think when it comes to deep work, I agree wholeheartedly, and it's very useful, but it has to be applied to your practical timetable.
Okay. Now, I'm curious to also know, as you're, in your whole personal development, productivity or time management system, how do you know what to say yes to, what to say no to? For example, this podcast interview, what was the processing that goes through your head? When I approached you on LinkedIn, that's where I messaged you, and, first I just said, hey, I heard about you from Nabil, and I didn't invite you right away. I just said, I always want to connect, And then later I approached you after a few weeks for an interview. But when you get a request like that, because you've done several podcasts or other engagements, how do you know what to say yes to and what to say no to?
So, as a Muslim, your decision making is being impacted. As an academic, your decision making is being impacted, or an entrepreneur. So if I was just an entrepreneur and all I'm thinking about is entrepreneurship, then yeah, I'm going to look at the follower count and I'm going to see what's the biggest impact. What can I sell? Do I have anything to sell here? Things like that.
Right.
But now I'm thinking, my perspective was also dawah and giving back to the community and all those things too. So I'm considering that also. Like, this is not just completely, a selfish endeavor. What can I gain from that? My thing is, if I can help, if I can impact, if anyone's going to benefit from what I'm saying, if anyone's going to learn from what I'm saying, then all that comes into it. So I mean, it's difficult to quantify exactly what who you're going to say yes to and who you're going to say no to. It's not much of a commitment. This is just an hour of my time or 2 hours, right? So it's not a big deal. And it's 4:00 too. So if you ask me at 10 a.m., you're gonna have to, you're gonna have to provide something more as well, right? We're gonna bribe me with. I don't know you that well, but I can see that you're a good guy from some of your other stuff. So why not? Why not provide benefit for each other, right? It's gonna, perhaps I can answer that question with the recent request I've been getting to adapt books, right? Because that's a much bigger commitment. So now that the Sheikh Yasir Qadhi book is out, I've been getting messages, can you adapt my series into a book? Okay, now this is starting to become a dilemma, because the wordsmiths model that I have is that I have, full-time staff that I've trained, so definitely vouch for. The standard is high, but the system is that I manage their work, right? I'm not proofreading and translating every single word, although, I would need thousands of hours within each week. So I'm managing the team. However, for the YQ project, I did every word myself. So it was 1,000 of my hours. So I had to make a big decision when it came to that, because that goes against every time management principle that I have. But for me, it was a case of طلب العلم. I'm a student of knowledge. This is the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. What is knowledge? Other than the Quran, what is more important? And that's why I was able to spend 12, 14 hours a day doing it, because whenever I would finish and I'd say, okay, let me go do something else. And then I was thinking, hang on, the thing that I'm doing now is not better and more noble than what I just left. So I'll put it away and I go back to work. And that would happen multiple times in the day. And I just realized, I'm just going to do this until I can no longer do it. And I'm just going to do it, spend every waking moment doing it, start cancelling classes and just doing this project. But that's a very unique project, right? So firstly, the topic itself. Secondly, the quality of the product itself, like Sheikh Yasir's Seerah, mashallah, is the best. I think it's a consensus, to be honest. I don't think a single person you ask will tell you that it's not the best Seerah lecture series in the English language. I don't think anyone, could disagree with that. Although there are a couple of other great ones, mashallah. Yeah. But it's up there. And then, to be honest with you, let's be completely frank and honest. After that, and with all sincerity and honesty, I would have done it for free. I hope the publishers don't watch this. Yeah, I hope the publishers don't watch this, but I would have done it for free anyway, because it was such an honor for me to do in the first place. But if we're going to be completely frank and honest with it, the magnitude of the project itself definitely was helpful too. It puts my name on the map more than it was anyway. That's for sure. That's definitely right. I'm still a human at the end of the day. I'm not gonna say, yeah, I'm not thinking about that. No, I am thinking about that, and then monetarily it was good for business as well, alhamdulillah. So all these, so you have to factor all the human things as well as the sincerity that you might have for the hereafter. You have to factor all these things.
Now you've spoken about prioritizing your studies right now over the entrepreneurship for you is a means to an end, not the end in and of itself. Yeah. Now, but you've also spoken that you are available 24/7 for clients. That no matter what time the call, you could take a call at 2 a.m. So I am curious. First of all, the nature of the business. I'm intrigued that a business like proofreading would have that kind of on-demand service required. You know what I'm saying? I would think you got a project and you have a timeline to do it, but first of all, why are people calling you at 2 a.m. or in middle of the night on an emergency basis? What are what's going on there?
Yeah. So there's a few questions in that, but the final question you ask is like, who's calling you at 2 a.m.? You know, I would have to explain like the evolution and the chronology of the business, because right now you probably recognize Wordsmiths as an editing and translation company for publishing houses and for people like, you know, for like Nabil or non-profit organizations.
Right.
So like right now, like 3 or 4 clients make up 90% of our income, like big publishing houses, and we're producing books for them. For the first 5 years of business, 95% of our clients were students. And we're proofreading and editing student assignments. And do you know any segment of the population that has worse time management than the students? No, right? So I got guys belling me up saying, you know, I've got 6 hours to hand in a 5,000 word document. Can you help me? And I'm like, yes. Yes, we can. If you pay triple, then I'm going to help you, right? That's what, so that's the context. And, you know, what you can turn down as an established business is very different to what you can turn down as an up-and-coming, you know, freelancer or entrepreneur. And I think that's the do-or-die attitude that most people get put off by when it comes to business and entrepreneurship. Have I lost you?
Yeah, you said that's the do-or-die there. So with that being said, have you considered in moving to like a product-based business versus like a client-focused business?
Well, I'm not sure if you've set up that question for me to talk about Kalaam, my latest business, or whether that's just a coincidence. But
it's a coincidence.
Okay, so I have, you know, for the past year, I've been working on a tech startup called Kalaam, and that's a whole different venture. It's a scale of magnitudes larger than Wordsmiths, but in short, it's like a Halal Spotify or Halal YouTube Premium. Halal audio for the Muslim world, or Islamic audio for the Muslim world. It's called Kalaam, and that's what we've been working on. But that's very different, to be honest. Like, so with Wordsmiths, I'm the owner, I'm the sole shareholder, and I have some staff, and it provides a nice income, alhamdulillah. But with Kalaam, like, I'm the CEO, but we have a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Marketing Officer. Like, it's a team. We're not taking any salary. We're just working. So that's a completely different ballgame. That's a tech product. And that's completely different. And to be honest, I have to ask myself with that too, like, as it progresses, if it succeeds or not. Like, this time next year, either Kalaam will be worth $50 million or it will not exist. It will be zero. Like, there will be no such thing as Kalaam. It will be one of those two things. Because that's the nature of a startup company. And when I say worth 50 million, I don't mean I have 50 million in my bank. It means we've acquired funding. $1 million worth of funding for 20%, or sorry, not 50 million, 5 million rather.
Yeah.
That's more realistic. So I meant to say 5 million, I said 50 million. I wish. So this time next year it's worth 5 million or it's worth zero. Whereas with Wordsmiths, alhamdulillah, it's neither of those. It's somewhere in the middle and it exists. So I have to ask myself with that if we do acquire funding, inshallah, which is the goal, then how do I position myself as a student of knowledge, and where do my priorities lie? So I have to, I've got some tough questions to address when it comes to that.
Right. So you're saying now you're going back to living in Egypt. You're saying you're going to leave Egypt in like a year or so. But what do you like other than hooliganism? What do you miss about England?
So seeing as on that note, the one thing that I don't miss and the one thing that I'm going to miss about Egypt, first I'll answer that, is the safety. And it's so funny when people ask me like, "Oh, is it safe in Egypt?" I'm like, "Are you joking, bro? Like, I don't walk at night in England with headphones. That's a rule for any individual in England. If you walk in at night on the sidewalk, on the pavement, and you're walking home playing music or playing anything, then you're an idiot, because you're setting yourself up for danger." In Egypt, I let my wife walk out at night by herself, and I have no problem. Right, so the levels of safety in the Middle East compared to England, I don't know about the Western, but to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same in other Western countries, is night and day. So that's one thing I'm going to miss for sure, is having to be on edge more in England. But as for what I would miss, the main thing that I cannot wait to get back to is some semblance of administration and organization. It not taking 2 weeks to renew your ID card, or getting sent back every 30 minutes for 6 hours waiting, or any form of administration whatsoever, any form of orderly fashion. I cannot wait to get back to, and that drives you crazy out here in the Middle East. To be honest with you, that's the main thing. But to be honest, home is home. That's what I would say. I would say home is home, and nothing can replace that familiarity. And even though I've spent years studying Arabic, it's still a second language. English, I was born and raised in Manchester. English is my first language, and Kurdish and Arabic are second languages. And so sometimes you might have to repeat something twice for someone to get it, depending on your accent, or they might speak twice and you ask them to repeat yourself. These are all micro experiences. But I can't wait to get back to just familiarity. Everything is familiar, how people speak and even how they act, and the roads that you go down, and the system. All these things are vastly underrated. When if you don't travel that much, then you don't appreciate them as much. But when you live abroad for a while, it kind of chips away at you slightly. So I can't wait to just get back to my comfort zone in a sense.
So with that being said, would you consider maybe ever settling in a Muslim country long term?
There are many considerations. Well, I'm going to say something controversial, so it's a nice little clickbait for your podcast. A nice little juicy 30-second clip that you can make. But I don't really believe in hijrah in our modern day context. I don't believe in the concept of hijrah as we live and speak right now. Of course, that doesn't mean historically, and of course, that doesn't mean in the future either. I'm talking about right now, 2023, as we live. I don't think there's much thing as hijrah, and the more I've lived in the Middle East. I mean, I lived in Egypt. I've had a few months stints in Saudi, in Mauritania, in other places too, and I've travelled to many more countries, and in so many ways, I would go as far as to say that I can live more comfortably as a Muslim in England than any of these Islamic countries, or Muslim countries, rather. Right? In so many ways, and I could make a long list of instances in which, or perspectives in which, I wouldn't go as far as to say that England is more of a Muslim country, but I can live comfortably and apply my Islam way more in England than I can in the country that I'm in right now, in many ways.
Go ahead.
Well, the question is, what's a Muslim country then, and what is hijrah, and what is
right.
What does that mean? Is it population, that the population is more than 51% Muslim, therefore it's a Muslim country, or what is it exactly?
Yeah, exactly. I was having a conversation last night with a friend. His wife is from London, and so we were talking about the whole. There's always this shade being thrown UK Muslims versus American Muslims, and UK Muslims say that American Muslims are liberal. And my point, I told them this is the UK, the density of Muslims that you guys have is just different than what we have. The reason we are the way we are in America is that we have Muslims scattered in small towns all across the country. We have kids growing up, there'll be one Muslim in the entire school, right? I almost feel and I was it's England could be, I've never been to England, but it seems like you hear about Luton, for example. This is a Muslim city. You know what I'm saying? That's what it sounds like. You compare it. Go ahead. I feel like you almost want to compare England to South Africa, not America.
Okay, that's a very good comparison actually, because I went to South Africa recently and I loved it to bits, but that's a very, very good comparison. There is one big difference between the two, which I'll say though. But as far as England, we say the Islamic State of East London. Forget Luton. We say the Islamic State of East London, yeah? One of the only masajid in England that has this adhan playing out loud is East London Mosque. But yeah, for sure, very similar to South Africa. The difference with South Africa is that the Muslims are in positions of economic and political power in South Africa, right? So the Muslims of South Africa are akin to the Jews in England, where they're a small minority but wield a lot of influence, right? And that's one thing I'm jealous about in South Africa. all the shops are halal. Even in England, the Muslim-owned shops are halal, right? But and some chains are halal. You know, for example, some KFC is halal, but not McDonald's. Nando's, many of Nando's are, but not all of them are. So in Muslim demographic populations, you can have halal. But in South Africa, everything's halal. Everything's halal. And it's not just about halal food, but generally the Muslims are wealthier than the non-Muslims. So they've you know, and there's a historical reason for that in the migration of the Indian Muslims as merchants, etc. But that's one of the differences. But yeah, for sure, in England, depending on where you live, especially if you exclude the villages and whatnot, but in the major cities, you're chilling, man.
Yeah. So I mean, I was talking to I did a podcast with was it Bro Haji, and he was like, Birmingham is the best city in America in the world for Muslims.
Okay. But it's the worst city in the world for a human being with dignity. It's absolute slum, bro. I don't enter the swamps of Birmingham unless this you know, fi sabilillah, if I'm given a talk. Otherwise, thanks but no thanks. I'll stick to Manchester. Thank you very much.
You had mentioned Sheikh Omar Khan is a role model. Like when we were talking on LinkedIn, you're like, oh, you had Sheikh Omar Khan on the show. I'm down.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Well, that's the peer review, right? So you asked me why I came on. Well, you know, I clicked on the link. I saw Omar Khan. I said, there you go. Sam'an wa ta'atan.
Yeah. It's funny because he's also a student of Sheikh Akram, but he's successful in the 9 to 5, right? You talked about like how the 9 to 5 isn't for you. It works for him. What have you learned about his approach though? And again, at the end of the day, we know that everyone does what makes sense for them. But what is it did you learn about Sheikh Omar's approach to his lifestyle with studying and 9 to 5? And it's really not 9 to 5 because he's an executive in America. These are like 10-hour days, right? So
it's not 9 to 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, look. As always, the caveat is I'm not judging. I'm not looking down. I'm not criticizing anybody with a 9 to 5, and that's very important to say because literally, like the vast majority of people, there's no such thing as entrepreneurship without people doing 9 to 5 because then the whole system wouldn't work in the first place, right? And so there's no shame, no problem whatsoever, right? We're talking about me, and we're talking about, you know, what works for me and for people who are inclined to certain things, right? So if you're happy to take on the stress and responsibility, but you want more free time and more money, then entrepreneurship is the way to go for sure, right? If you're happy for that trade-off. You're asking me about Omar Khan. You cannot use an anomaly and extrapolate an argument from that. The guy is a beast, mashallah. The guy is that's like saying, that's like me saying, the closer a scholar is to the Prophet ﷺ in chronology, the earlier scholars, we take over the later scholars. And you say, but Ibn Taymiyyah, he did this, and this, so therefore, okay, a 1 in a million person is not used as an example. So you're talking about Omar Khan, is a beast, married to, I don't want to say beast, married to someone equally as impressive, has children who are equally impressive, mashallah, the family itself is a 1 in a million family. So the question that I would pose to you is Omar Khan's success because he's working 9 to 5 or is it in spite of his 9 to 5? And so the follow-up question I would have is that, what if he didn't need to work 9 to 5? What could he achieve with that? And this is a genuine question because it would be interesting. Is it the case that if you gave him $20 million and said, look, just quit your job and just be a da'i or a researcher or alim, would he be able to increase his productivity, times 5? Or is he extracting that level of efficiency because he has a limited time and because he's working all day and he only has a bit of time left and he's extracting that like legendary level of efficiency? Which is it? Allah, I don't know. I would probably say though that if he had an extra 8 hours in a day to produce Islamic, content, that's going to be better for everyone, in my opinion.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. Finally, to wrap up here, I just want to ask, because this comes up a lot when we talk about time management, productivity, and the world we live in. Do you consume social media? Obviously, you're on LinkedIn. But what advice do you have for people? Like, so that's the first question. Like, how do you consume social media? I'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I use Facebook mainly.
Okay.
I many years ago I had Instagram and I deleted it just because it's like so haram, to be honest. Like it's important. The thing is, once they start forcing you to view things that you've not even followed, so once the explore page becomes a madness, and once things on your timeline becomes things that you've not even chosen, then it starts to get into dangerous territory. So I deleted Instagram years ago, like more than a decade ago. Similarly with Snapchat. So the only thing I use is Facebook, and LinkedIn is more of a professional thing, just to update people. So I usually use Facebook. But to be honest, as a detriment, and to be honest, if I didn't, I would be. It's funny how people think I'm productive. I feel like a massive imposter. I feel like massive imposter. You know, people think I'm productive, and I think, you know what? If I didn't have Facebook, I would be so productive. I would read so many books, mashallah. But yeah, Facebook is it's a massive double-edged sword, because I post on Facebook, so I've got a Facebook page and I'm posting on Facebook. If I could somehow perfect the balance of posting and then leaving, and only coming on to post and then leaving, that would be great. But otherwise, yeah, I do. Put it this way: I consume Facebook to my own detriment.
Yeah, well, I think you have avoided the cesspool that is Twitter.
Oh my God! Wallahi, do you know what I said to my wife this morning? I kid you not. This morning I said this very statement to my wife. This morning, for some reason, after Fajr, I couldn't sleep. It was too hot. So I was just in the majlis and I was just on my phone. And I just opened up Twitter. I don't use Twitter. And I just opened it up. Because of this whole, you know, what's it called?
Navigating differences?
Yeah, right? Yeah. So, you know, because of the whole thing, I thought, you know what, I'm curious. Let me see. Yes. I said, you know, after 30 minutes, I was filled with dread. Wallahi, I was filled with dread. And I said to my wife, I said, listen, whenever I start to have husn al-dhan of the Muslim ummah, whenever I start to feel empowered by the ummah, it immediately dissipates and disappears and just dissolves after 30 minutes on Twitter. After 30 minutes on Twitter, my impression of the ummah is rock bottom. After 30 minutes on Twitter, I feel like there's no hope. I become all the people I criticize, you know, people who are like, oh, this is why the ummah is in this way, and there's no hope in the ummah, and it's Yawm al-Qiyamah. I become that person. After 30 minutes on Twitter, what an absolute cesspool. Ya salam. It's like the worst of humanity. And you know, my wife made a very good point. She said, because of the lack of nuance, and you know, the word character limit, and the nature in which it's set up, and the infrastructure, it eradicates any form of context, of nuance, so even people who you, on a day-to-day basis, you would get along with, if you just took their tweets versus your tweets, you're enemies. Because there's no place to clarify, it's not set up in a way that is conducive to any form of positive communication. So it pits people against each other, it's rife with misunderstanding. It just creates enemies out of friends. And that's out of the good people. Never mind the people that it attracts, which is it gives a platform for people who do not deserve a platform. So I don't think it's changed people. I think people were the same people throughout the millennia in which human beings have existed. However, it's given a platform for those ignorant, illiterate villagers who no one would have heard. Someone in a pub who's saying, yeah, you know, this thing or this thing. No, like that quote, you know, was dissolved in the atmosphere and no one heard it except for the other ignorant, illiterate person that he was addressing. But now it's been immortalized on Twitter and you're forced to read it. And so, and my final point is, social media has given the impression that people are equal when they're not. And I'll say that with my chest, when they're not. This wise Shaykh who spent 50 years studying and mashallah, Allah's blessed him with intellect and he's teaching you this thing. And you're not equal. But just because you both have a Facebook account and you both have a Twitter account and your words are being conveyed in an equal manner, it's the democratization of knowledge has given people the impression that people are equal when they're not. And they absolutely are not equal. And that's the biggest problem.
Well, no, I think that's like avoiding that, because what happens is that like the follow-up question is, people will start studying from teachers, right? A person will get on a journey of knowledge, and then they'll go on social media and they'll see somebody make a clip about take a clip of one of their teachers that maybe was said in a certain context, but that context is removed, and then they are seeing their teacher being attacked on a social platform, right? Because everyone has their critics these days, and there's always these short clips floating around, and that enters. Then people start having doubts, especially when you're a beginner. Like right now, let's say you've been a student of Sheikh Akram for a while. You're not going to get fazed by a clip of Sheikh Akram floating around on Facebook. That's people are criticizing him, right? But if someone is new to the game, I think that's where it's going to be like it could affect them. How would you advise that initial student when they are seeing their teacher being criticized and they have no context? Because I get this question a lot from like, I'll be like a high school kid or a college kid, like who's like 20 years younger than me, and they'll ask me about like something so and so said or some, and like I'm like, you know them? I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, yeah, back then but I remember those days because you would start studying with somebody and then you would see somebody criticized them and you don't know and you're like, oh no, it's like it throws you for a loop. So what advice do you have for those people when they see that content of their sheikh or teacher being criticized?
I strongly empathize with beginner students of knowledge, especially young beginner students of knowledge. And I always get asked, like, how can I decide who's authentic in seeking from? And the cruel irony of that is that the more knowledge you have, the more you can decide what's an acceptable difference of opinion and what is the red line as to not to take the good and leave the bad. And so the more you know, the better understanding you have, so therefore the less you know, the harder it is. I strongly empathize with that. But as for the specific question, what I would say is, and this is another golden lesson I've taken from Sheikh Akram that he's taught us, is that you have to make a distinction between teachers and preachers. You have to make a distinction. The teacher you're going to find in the class, the preacher you're going to find on the minbar, or the virtual minbar, now is social media. So it's 1,000 times worse than what he was even saying, which was the minbar is in the khutbah. Basically, the khatib, who is just self-appointed khatib, is talking about Islam. You have to differentiate between them. So if you're in a class and your teacher's statements are being dissected, then take it seriously. And more likely than not, the person is not going to be attacked. Your teacher is not going to be attacked. What he's saying is going to be dissected. Perhaps he's going to disagree with them, and he's going to come out academically, and he's going to say, "This is why I disagree," and that's fine. Your teacher is not infallible. Your teacher might say something wrong. That's completely fine. Either agree with your teacher based on his argument, or agree with the critic based on his argument, and that's fine. The difference is when you're when you're viewing something, when you're receiving something on social media, this is not coming from a teacher. This is coming from a preacher. It's not even a preacher, to be honest with you. We know these type of people. And what I would say to this young person is, wallahi, 99% of these videos and statuses and tweets are incorrect about your teacher. No matter who your teacher is, they've either been miscategorized, misinterpreted, taken out of context, or just made to be what they're not. And every single time, almost without exception, except for when the teacher's made a mistake, he's fumbled or something like that. But 99% of the time, when I've bothered to even listen, I just see it and I know from my experience that this is not worth listening to. But this young person is going to be duped into it. So I said, you know what, let me listen. Let me see what this guy's got to say. Almost always they're wrong. They're always wrong. And I can give so many examples. If recently someone made a video about Sheikh Abu Isa, let's just dissect one example, right? Sheikh Abu Isa said that if you have to quote Quran and Sunnah to your wife or husband, your marriage is on the rocks. That's what he said. If you have to quote hadith and ayat, right? This got taken and is a massive controversy, big hoo-ha. Sheikh Abu Isa is the meaning of Quran and Sunnah, and that's like the title. He's disrespecting them. Sheikh Abu Isa said, don't listen to Quran and Sunnah. You listen to what he's saying, and I don't understand. Okay, I need to pick my words carefully, right? I don't understand how stupid you can be. I didn't pick my words carefully, right? Sheikh Abu Isa is saying that if your marriage, if you've become so disillusioned with your spouse, that there is such a lack of love, of rahmah, of mawaddah, of compassion, of empathy, that the only way to get your spouse to listen to you is to say that Allah and His Messenger said, if you don't listen to me, you're going to be sinful. Then your relationship is so fragile that it's definitely on the rocks. And I do not find a single thing wrong with that, and it's 100% true what he's saying, right? Because if you just think about it for a second, it doesn't mean Quran and Sunnah is not to be listened to. It means your relationship with your wife should be or your husband should be so strong that you shouldn't need to appeal to a higher authority. You shouldn't need to go to a Qadhi, a judge, to say, do this and don't do that. And who is the biggest judge except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the same thing applies to a judge. If I say, if you have to get a court summons to get your wife to wash the dishes, then your marriage is on the rocks. Yes. Okay, Allah is the judge. Allah is the judge with a capital J, right? So that statement is completely in line with Quran and Sunnah. But can you see how much of a clickbait video that can be made? So now I've had to explain in 10 to 15 minutes why that is an absolutely foolish, idiotic, irresponsible statement to make, or video to make, about Shaykh Abu Isa, which he just spoke facts about Quran and Sunnah. Okay, do I have to speak for 15 minutes about each one of those videos and each one of those articles? No, it's impossible. So you have to learn sooner rather than later that 99% of these clickbait videos are either made or born out of jealousy, which I'm sorry to say is the case much of the time. It's either born out of jealousy or a lack of knowledge or something more vindictive, where the other person has a sinister motive. And it's going to be one of those three things. So if you can convince yourself with conviction that 99% of the time you're not going to seek any authentic knowledge from these social media platforms and limit yourself to the class when it comes to that, then it fixes the problem. It fixes most of the problem.
Dr. Salah, it was a real pleasure to have you on. Is there any closing thoughts you have? I do. So I'm recording this podcast. We're recording this end of May 2023. We'll probably release it around the middle of June. The book, the Sheikh Yasir Qadhi Seerah book, when will that be available if it's not available already?
Yeah, so that will be available by the time this podcast comes out. So it's going to come out in a couple of weeks, inshallah. It's first going to come out in England. We're going to do a pre-release launch where we're going to speak at an event and sell the pre-release copies. Then it's going to come out in England in mid-June, and I think towards the end of June it'll come out in America too. Honestly, if I have closing statements on that, I am extremely excited to receive people's feedback, for better or for worse, any constructive feedback, because I am so optimistic about the quality of the work itself, inshallah ta'ala, because I read all the English Seerah books out there, and I identified the strengths and weaknesses in each of them, right? And each of them has notable strengths and some weaknesses too, right? I've taken that and I've tried to take the strengths from each of those to the best of my ability. And the 10 years experience that I've had with wordsmiths as to how to articulate myself in a written format and how to express myself in a written format, coupled and combined with Sheikh Yasir Qadhi's masterful performance of the Seerah itself and the detail in which he went to, I'm extremely happy about the product itself as to how it's turned out. But the problem is I'm too biased. So when I say it's the best thing since sliced bread, I'm too biased. So, inshallah ta'ala, the only ingredient it's missing is tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Without His tawfiq, it's not going to be accepted by the community. If we pray for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq, I think it's going to make a big, big splash. I think people are going to be surprised at how good it is, inshallah ta'ala. And I won't be able to prove me wrong. So, check the book out, discuss it. I'm so open to feedback from it, how it can be improved, and to discuss. And who knows, we can do a round two when the book is out, inshallah, we can discuss.
How's the and maybe I've got to come to. I've always had this intention to come to England. Maybe when you go back to England, I'll meet you there, and we'll do it in person. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, that would be beautiful. Yeah, I much prefer in person.
Same. If you see a lot of my recordings, I travel. My setup is I can store it into a suitcase and a backpack with videos and everything, lights and everything. But if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
I'm very accessible. So Facebook, I'm very accessible on Facebook, LinkedIn, and even email, salahsharif@hotmail.com.
Okay.
On any platform.
Well, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Salah. It was a real pleasure. I think people are going to really benefit from this conversation. I always caveat every time I do an interview, I try to consume as many of your previous content as possible because I don't see the point of regurgitating something you've said a million times, right? So I think I try to keep it like a little bit unique. There's some overlap here and there, obviously, but for the most part, that's what I aim to do. So hopefully,
and that's why you're successful, and that's why you did a great job, and you did a great job, because it's true. Because I did a few podcasts, and sometimes it gets repetitive. Nothing we spoke about today was repetitive. So mashallah, that's why you're the best at what you do.
I appreciate it.
I mean.
All right, for listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. If you want to support the show financially, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Sultans and Sneakers. If not, you can still support by following on social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, share with your friends, like and subscribe, all the good stuff. If you're listening on the audio platforms, leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For my special guest, Dr. Salah Sharief, I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster, signing off. Assalamu alaikum.